Yeah.
And that's where the renewable energy is now winning the economic argument as well. It's not only the carbonization or the decarbonization argument, but it's also about getting cheaper electricity dispatched through the load dispatch centers.
Hello and welcome to the season 2 of Understanding the Future. I'm your host Punit Gandhi, and Climate Center for Cities is excited to bring to you a podcast about the future of work in the field of climate change, urban development, sustainability, and innovation. We will talk to experts working on ground as well as in the top management of government and non-governmental organizations to better understand how their field looks like in future. This will help us in preparing to enable climate actions as well as gauge the type of skill sets and jobs that would be required in future to solve complex challenges. If you are listening to it for the first time, do tune into season 1.
Hello, and welcome to season 2 of Understanding the Future. I'm your host, Punit Gandhi, and today we have with us Dr. Mahesh Patankar. He is Managing Director at MPEnsystems Advisory Private Limited, and he will help us better understand electricity markets. Welcome to the show, Dr. Mahesh.
Thanks a lot,
Uh,
Puneet. Glad to be here.
Thank you, sir. So before we start, I want to get down to the basics. So when we are talking about electricity markets, we are talking about production, which is general power plants, both coal, solar, everything. Consumption, which is you and I consuming electricity to do this Zoom call, as well as all industrial applications. And then there is a big market in between, which is of transmission. So while we focus today on transmission, can you help us first understand in brief what is the kind of electricity transmission do we have in India? What is the governing structure, and how does it function for our audience so that they can understand the topic further in depth?
Sure. The Indian electricity market, as you rightly mentioned, we have three specific silos, which is generation, which conventionally has been large power plants, which are coal-based and thermal power-based. But with the advent of renewable energy, now we have started seeing several smaller plants and consumers also acting as prosumers. So that's the generation side of things. Then there is transmission, as you rightly mentioned. So the transmission is split between two aspects. One is the interstate transfer of electrons from one power plant, which may be existing in southern part of the country, to a load center, which may be in the north side of the country. So that's the interstate transmission system that we are referring to. And then there is intrastate transmission system, wherein you have one particular state in which you have the power plant and you also have the load center associated in that particular state itself. So that is something which is governed as intrastate transmission system. And then we have something called as distribution companies or the distribution sector, which is again through a licensing mechanism. And these licenses are issued by the state electricity regulatory commissions, which allows certain licensors to distribute electricity to all the consumers like you and me. So that is how the electricity market is structured. And there are policy and the regulatory jurisdictions related to all of this. So
Yeah.
when Electricity Act of 2003 was enacted, the generation side of the things were delicensed, meaning anyone could meet all the environmental norms set forth by the central government or the state governments, and they could set up a generation plant. They would not need a specific license to generate electricity, and they can sign their own contracts with individual load centers such as the distribution companies and be in business. But when it comes to the distribution companies, law requires the state electricity regulatory commissions to provide license and give licenses to distribution companies to be in that business. And the other aspect of the jurisdictional issue related to the policy is that everything that goes from one state to the other or crosses the state boundary is covered under the jurisdiction of Central Electricity Regulatory Commission, and anything that pertains to intra-state transfer of electrons is covered by the State Electricity Regulatory Commission.
Okay. So we have in three-layered structure where there's a center, there is a state which is again governed by regional load dispatch centers, and then there is a local which is discoms. Now this was quite sorted before, and with more renewable energy coming into the picture, this kind of changed a bit, especially with net metering policies coming into picture, gross metering policies coming in, because now everyone has their own power plants in their own places. So, how has this affected the traditional electricity markets, and has our industry been able to cope up with that kind of changes?
Yeah, so we are seeing substantial changes, but I would say the pace at which we are seeing the changes in the electricity markets per se is not as dramatic as one would imagine. So, to give you a little bit of perspective, I mentioned about the generation companies that would generate electricity and supply it to the load centers through the distribution companies. So they would
Yeah,
sign something called as power procurement agreement, or in short, we can call it as PPA. And the PPA structure basically provided the generation companies and their bankers comfort related to offtake of electrons, which
mm,
is important for them to put their weight behind and finance that particular project. So in India, most of the electricity that we see flowing goes through this long-term PPAs, which range anywhere between 15 to 25 years of
okay,
tenure of those contracts. And most of the electricity goes through the mechanisms set forth in those power procurement agreements. And these power procurement agreements are typically signed with three types of generators. One is the central generating stations,
mm,
typically owned by something like National Thermal Power Corporation, NTPC. Then there
yeah,
are state level generation companies, which are subsidiaries and that are owned by the individual state governments, such as in case of Maharashtra, there is Maharashtra Generation Company or Mahagenco, which is a state subsidiary. So they would have some signed contracts with the sibling electricity distribution company in the
yeah,
same state. At the same time, they would probably also have some kind of power procurement agreement with other state utilities or the discoms. That is how most of the power plants sort of operate, and there are of course merchant power plants, which are private
yeah,
sector investments in ultra mega power plants and all the independent power producers or IPPs, as we call those,
yeah,
that exist in India. As far as the smaller units are concerned, you are absolutely right when it comes to the renewable energy, specifically on rooftops of different kinds of buildings, industrial premises, and so on. There are certain laws such as cross metering and net metering of solar photovoltaic systems that get connected to the grid, and there is some kind of a sale and purchase agreements signed between some of these larger rooftop photovoltaic systems and the electricity grid, in this case, the power distribution companies. Now, your question was, do we see the industry coping up with this? Absolutely, yes. The industry has been pretty reactive, and they have come to terms of this changing market structure in the electricity sector. And they are coping up very well. You also correctly mentioned about the load dispatch centers, and I would like to spend just a couple of minutes on describing how the load dispatch happens. So, at the national level, the national grid, which takes electrons from one state to the other state and one region to the other region, is governed by Power Grid Corporation of India. And Power Systems Operating Company, POSOCO, which is a part of the Power Grid Corporation of India. They are responsible to maintain the grid frequency at the national level. So that's their jurisdiction. And what they do is they collaborate with the regional load dispatch centers and the state load dispatch centers. So, for example, in the southern region load dispatch center is located in Karnataka, and there is also a Karnataka load dispatch center which is located in Karnataka. So, the responsibility of this regional load dispatch center is to allow for any kind of collaboration that may be required between the national level grid management and the local level grid management. But when it comes to a state specific load dispatch activity, that is typically carried out by the state specific load dispatch centers. And almost all the states in the country have their own dedicated load dispatch centers.
Okay. So that's quite important, and because of this now, there is quite a lot of digitization as well, if I'm not wrong, right, in the whole ecosystem, that we can at the present moment itself look at how much electricity is being generated and being consumed on the national level. Am I correct, or am I wrong over here?
No, you're absolutely right. There is a lot of digitization that we have seen, especially during the last 2 decades. And we also need to take on board at what voltage levels the digitization is 100% and what troubles a load dispatch center. So when it comes to larger plants, say 660 megawatt plant or 500 megawatt plant of
Hmm.
NTPC or any
Yeah.
IPP or a plant from say Tata Power and so on, the load dispatch centers have complete visibility to those plants. But when
Okay.
it comes to smaller units that are put up on the rooftops of different industrial premises or housing societies and so on, the load dispatch centers do not have any kind of visibility to those. So one can
Okay.
safely assume that anything that is above, say, 25 megawatt of generation capacity, typically the
Yeah.
load dispatch centers would have some visibility to the way in which the power gets generated. But if it comes
Yeah.
to a very dispersed, disaggregated power generation activity, such as from the solar rooftops, it becomes very difficult for the load dispatch centers to get that visibility. And it matters a lot to them because if you look at the renewable energy where you have solar as well as say wind, if there is a sudden dip in the wind direction or wind velocity, there is going to be a dip in the power generation from those wind farms. And if there is a specific cloud cover coming in a particular micro climate and a microclimatic zone in any city, then you're going to again have lesser production of electrons from the solar photovoltaic and the rooftop systems.
Yeah.
Some of this, I would say, variables trouble the load dispatch centers a lot because that impacts how much electricity is being pumped into the grid, and if there is any kind of sudden dip in the way in the electricity is pumped into the grid. So that is why the digitization at the dispersed renewable energy generation, at the same time, digitization for the load centers, even a small and medium scale enterprise or a small precinct where you have several small commercial shops is absolutely important. And actually, India is going towards that. So there are specific initiatives related to smart meters where the
Yeah.
smart meters can be installed at all of these units. What is important is for some kind of an aggregator to get all of that information at one place and then get all of that information as a part of the power procurement and the power management sort of activity.
Absolutely, absolutely. I do want to come back to the energy forecasting that we have touched upon. But before that, I would also like to understand, like, when we look at India's consumption scenario, capacity scenario, we have sufficient amount of power plants, especially there is more than 230 gigawatts of coal power plants. We have 90 gigawatts of renewable energy, 40 more than 40 gigawatts of hydro energy. But our PLF for thermal power plants is quite low. And what is the major reason for that? And how does it affect our grid infrastructure?
PLFs have been low for several plants, also because of certain rules in the electricity market, which require something called as merit order dispatch to be
Yeah.
followed by the load dispatch center operators. So, which means if you have a stack of different power generation units, and if
Mm.
you stack the variable cost of that generation, and let's assume one plant has a variable cost of power generation as 2 rupees per kilowatt hour compared to something which is 8 rupees per kilowatt hour. The load dispatch activity is set up in such a way that the plants which are with low variable cost are
Mm.
something which need to be dispatched more than the others, firstly.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
secondly, all the renewable energy that gets generated is classified as something called as a must run, which means if
Yeah.
any kind of renewable energy is generating electrons, that needs to get dispatched no matter what, and they have that priority. Okay,
Yeah.
so that is the way in which it sort of impacts the plant load factor of plants which have higher generation cost or higher variable cost. And I also need to sort of put something in more perspective here, which is about I mentioned something called as power procurement agreements, which are signed
Yeah.
by generation companies with the discoms. And these power procurement agreements have typically two components. One is a fixed cost component, and the other one is the variable cost. So even if the plant is dispatching electrons or not, the distribution companies are obliged to pay for the fixed cost. Okay,
Okay.
so from the perspective of power generation and the power dispatch and
Mm.
the economics of all of that, the distribution companies end up paying the fixed cost, but they can save on the variable cost if they make sure that they give priority to the lower variable cost plants to get dispatched very soon. Okay, and these are
Yeah.
some of the changes which the Central Electricity Regulatory Commission brought about when they launched something called as real-time market, and their proposed launch of the next level of electricity markets, which is called as market-based economic
Yeah.
dispatch, and that will also lead to something called as ancillary services to be valued and dispatched in different manner frequently. So I just wanted to sort of give you the perspective of the relationship between the variable cost and the plant load factor
Yeah.
that you mentioned in your question. Punit?
Thank you. And just a bit of a forward on that line. Absolutely, that's right that we have to give priority based on this. But is it possible then that because we can utilize more power plants, and if there is, how can we come over with this challenge so that we everyone can like almost now we have 99.9% electricity infrastructure in place as per the government data. So can we then make it more available for everyone in the society, like industries, agriculture, domestic markets, something on 24/7 lines?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The transmission and distribution infrastructure is very high, and the number that you mentioned, which is 99.99%, is not unimaginable.
Yeah.
Now, all of that infrastructure allows the distribution companies to distribute electricity to all the consumers under something called as universal service obligations. So there's an obligation on the person or the discom which is getting the license to distribute electricity. So this universal service obligation requires them to supply electricity whenever the consumer wants. So, and that
Yeah.
is basically going towards 24 by 7. There are certain constraints related to the transmission system where you may see sudden rise in the requirement of the electricity, and you may see sudden dip in the requirement of the electricity. And that's where the load dispatch centers and the load centers need to work together to make sure that there is no undue pressure built on the transmission lines,
Yeah.
and the transmission lines are always available for a dispatch of electrons. And that's where some innovations are required related to how do we bring the generation and the load centers together
Yeah.
to use the maximum amount of electricity. I also must mention that you referred to several plants and the plant load factors and so on. And I also touched upon something called as merit order dispatch, which means
Yes.
the lower cost electricity should get dispatched sooner
So
before
yes.
the high cost electricity that should get dispatched.
Yeah.
And that's where the renewable energy is now winning the economic argument as well. It's not only the carbonization or the decarbonization argument, but it's also about getting cheaper electricity dispatched through the load dispatch centers and bringing that electricity to the consumers. Because if you really notice what's happening as far as the market based disclosure and the bidding that happened in the solar and the wind sector in the
Yeah.
recent past, you would notice nothing less than say nothing more than say 2.5 rupees as an average cost of
Yeah.
electricity from the solar sources, which means renewable is now becoming cheaper. And if the renewable
Absolutely.
is becoming cheaper, I think it's important uh, to dispatch the renewables a lot more. There is a strong economic argument complementing a much stronger decarbonization requirement of the Indian economy.
Absolutely. I agree with you over there. And I think that's quite important as well when we look at it from bigger perspective of decarbonization. So coming next to the part of something called as it, something where we bring in Indian Energy Exchange or Power Grid Exchange India Limited, Power Exchange India Limited. Now, these are real-time markets of grid infrastructure, right? And how are they performing as of now, especially with so much of information in hand? Does it make a better infrastructure for the whole of organization? Because I'm assuming they still have somewhere close to 5 gigawatt of load on them and not more than that. Of the 370
Yeah.
gigawatt, that is the total.
So basically, we have to see what is the total load required in the country. So
Yeah.
I think last week or last to last week, India hit the highest electricity demand of something like 187 gigawatt, and this
Yeah.
is even comparing to the pre-COVID era, if I remember it correctly.
Yeah.
All the electricity that goes through the India Energy Exchange and the Power Exchange of India Limited are the two exchanges that have licenses from the regulator to trade in electricity. The total volume of that goes through these exchanges is no more than 3%. But one
Okay.
should be sort of mindful that it started with less than 1%, and now you already are at 3%, probably going
Yeah.
just a little bit above 3%. But the
Yeah.
absolute million units or million kilowatt hours that get transferred through the India Energy Exchange and the Power Exchange of India Limited has increased because the load has increased. So this,
Yeah.
even if the 3% remains the same, the 3% of 100 gigawatt before and 3% of 187 gigawatt now, that has actually
Absolutely.
changed the paradigm. So I was sort of taking that forward, and then I was trying to describe a new market-based instrument which is launched by CERC and the Ministry of Power, called as
Okay.
real-time market, wherein
Okay.
uh, the IEX and PXIL are now trading additional electricity that is remaining on the table after the load dispatch centers schedule their generation, and if the generation plants has unrequisitioned surplus, they can trade it in that real-time market, and that typically happens between -2 hours and 0 hours, and 0 hours being when the actual dispatch happens. And that market is also now sort of coming up, and that is actually providing very interesting benefits to the distribution companies as well as large industries that are on the open access, who are
Yeah.
buying electricity directly from the grid, because
Yeah.
now they have an access to very low cost electricity, somewhere between say 2 to 3.5 rupees a kilowatt hour. So some of these reforms are sort of helping electricity markets to reduce the cost entire sort of system.
Absolutely. This market sounds very interesting, especially in the terms that. So I have come from the background where I understand the point of renewable energy forecasting for the grids because they are very important when you're looking at such a big ecosystem. Now, a service like that, in addition to the service somewhere which is forecasting the demand of electricity as well, can help these markets a lot. And I guess though they were not too prevalent in India, now this kind of technology would come up much more than before. Uh,
Absolutely. So, yeah, I
yeah,
agreed with you 100%, because in the past, what we would see is there would be different cities and the industrial requirement and the agriculture requirement. So, let's call that as load. And
yeah,
then, in order to meet that load, you would fire up certain generation stations and so on. Okay, so the generation was trying to meet the load. But now we are reaching a situation where the load can start meeting the available generation. And
yeah,
that I'm making this sort of statement because now you have started seeing a lot of renewable energy coming into the grid, which
yeah,
means there is a great opportunity for the generation which is low cost to be absorbed in the load centers. Okay,
yeah,
and one should sort of take complete advantage of low cost electrons that are available, and there are several ways to sort of do that. And in fact, I would like to spend a little bit time on that. I
sure,
would like to sort of propose a few things that are possible for the Indian electricity market. One is
perfect.
grid interactive buildings.
Yeah,
So you can have different types of grid interactive buildings which can take advantage of low cost electricity that's available in the marketplace, and then they can start using certain measures such as thermal energy storage or battery energy storage, so they can
yeah,
buy when the electrons are available for cheap, and they can use it when they actually require it.
yeah,
So grid interactive buildings is sort of one aspect of that. Then there is another aspect which is in all the industrial sector. Let's take, for example, arc furnaces and the foundry industry. So now
yeah,
the industry needs to start sort of moving towards, say, electric arc furnaces, and they can take advantage of low cost electricity that's available for them to use in the industrial production processes.
yeah,
The third example that comes to my mind is that of electric vehicles. So you
hmm,
have a lot of electric vehicles coming into the marketplace. So these EVs can start charging whenever you have cheaper and abundant electricity available, specifically from the renewable energy sources. So
yeah,
that's another sort of opportunity that we have. And if you really look at farms to fork opportunities
huh,
in the food value chain, the
yeah,
entire cold storage infrastructure is something which can again benefit from cheaper electricity that's available. Because
true.
when you're running cold storages, you can dip the temperatures to a certain level, and you can pre-cool the entire system to make sure that you're running it on cheaper electrons, and then you can start consuming less and less when you have high cost of the electricity. So I think this entire paradigm shift is very interesting in India, and that is actually going to offer a lot of opportunities for the grid management, how we are managing the transmission infrastructure, and most
Hmm,
importantly, how we can benefit from digitization of the
yeah.
generation side as well as the load side of the equation in the electricity market.
Absolutely, absolutely. You're right there. Like I am as well looking for this kind of things in the future. But one of my major concern comes here is with the lines of how open is market towards startups, because this is all directly trading, giving solutions which are not existent in the market, because most of our governing bodies are either at state level or central level in the electricity markets. So how do you think that kind of formulation is happening in the ecosystem as well, so that more and more we can bring in peer-to-peer trading, your low electricity storage, and things like that?
Absolutely. So there is immense knowledge that exists in large public sector undertakings as well as
Yeah,
large private sector companies. And these are world's who's who that we have in
yeah,
India as far as the digitization is concerned. But there
true.
is immense knowledge also available in the innovators who take that big leap and who launch their startups and who have lot of great ideas to
Yeah,
benefit to bring benefits to the electricity markets, and one needs to nurture that. So I have a few sort of thoughts on how do we really get the startup community innovate, and how do we
yeah,
encourage them to bring their solutions to the market. And let's take simple examples such as applications of machine learning and artificial intelligence.
yeah,
If you have sort of digital meters, you are getting a lot of data. And if you have a lot of data, you can literally do better forecasting of the load, you can do better forecasting of the solar and wind generation, and
yeah,
then you can clearly sort of make sure that the overall cost to the economy goes down if you are able to manage data perfectly well. There are
true.
several examples of such startups being sort of prominent in India, but we need to learn a little bit from the European continent and the North American continent, and also Australia and Japan, and to a certain extent even Singapore, wherein the governments there encouraged the startup community to come up with specific proof of concepts. They came up with certain grants which they offered to the startups to prove the points that they were making as far as the great management is concerned. And they also allowed some of that to be absorbed in the mainstream electricity management issues. I would like to give a very interesting example from Singapore, wherein in the water sector, they developed specific sets of solutions that came from the startup community. And if those proof of concept projects were successful, the water utility started giving them actual purchase orders to
Yeah,
mainstream their solutions into the market. And I really would like to see something similar happening in India as well, wherein
yeah,
the distribution companies, such as, say, joint venture companies in Delhi and other places, as well as public sector distribution companies in several states that we have in India, should start encouraging the startup communities to develop certain solutions, and they should make sure that these innovations are brought into the mainstream electricity management with a clear objective of bringing economic value to the electricity market in India, to reduce the costs and to also deepen the decarbonization efforts that we have ongoing in the country. So we need to develop this kind of a ecosystem. We also need to have some private equity players and the venture capital companies to back all of this sort of effort up. I would like to cite one simple example that I was a part of. Um,
yeah,
as a part of my activities with the Regulatory Assistance Project in the year 2020, we launched a business competition for budding startups and innovators. It was termed as Electron Vibe, and we had New Energy Nexus, another sort of startup incubator, as a partner when we sort of launched that. And there were very interesting 10 entries that we received, which were readily available for the distribution companies to absorb in their mainstream electricity market. And that was quite a good success. I think we need
yeah,
to take such effort to the next level to make sure that the startups also get the required equity funding, debt, and so on, so that they
yeah,
can develop their products in such a way that they can compete in the marketplace. In India, there are several large multinational companies that are providing solutions to the electricity market, which include, say, for example, Schneider, ABB, Siemens, and so on. I think I would like to see certain bids from the government machinery, which require some of these large companies to also tie up and collaborate with
yeah,
innovators that are
yeah,
basically smaller companies, So those kinds of hybrid solutions being brought by an established network management company and
Yeah.
some innovators from the startup community, it will be sort of really, really good support that we can provide to the entire innovation space in the electricity market in India. Puneet?
Absolutely, absolutely, that's correct. And I do believe that it's important that that kind of facilitation starts happening so that these novel concepts of grid interactive buildings and energy storage in itself is then goes beyond what we can imagine. I feel that. And in that, do you know any discoms which have specifically taken up startups and scale, or at least had a POC or something on ground?
Yeah, there are quite a few, and there are these are mostly from the private sector. So
Okay.
BSS Rajdhani and BSS Yamuna in Delhi, as
Yeah.
well as CSC from Kolkata, have
Okay.
done some very interesting proof of concept projects, inviting the
Okay.
startups, and these are in the area of either load forecasting or coming up with specific storage solutions or
Yeah.
managing something called as demand response initiative, wherein the demand can respond to the generation availability and the cost of electrons that are available at that point in time in the marketplace. So these are some of these examples from the private sector involvement. And the likes of Kerala government-run electricity utility, as well as BESCOM, even MSEDC to a very small extent, they have been a part of something called as smart grid projects, and they
Okay.
have invited some of these startups to come up with different types of solutions, and they gave them the opportunity to prove their concepts. So it
Yeah.
is emerging, but I definitely would like to see more and more and more of some of these proof of concept projects to be supported by the Indian electricity distribution companies.
Absolutely, absolutely, you are right. Like I have also seen quite a lot of startups in rural microgrids. So because they are not directly connected to the grid, so they can sustain themselves. But I hope that more and more startups can come into this ecosystem as well, where nationwide grid scale projects can also be taken up by them eventually. So one of the final questions that we generally ask everyone is on the skill sets, and we have talked about interesting technologies that can come into picture over here. So if you can give our audience, which is majorly youth, understand them in a better context, what kind of skill sets would they need for future if they want to pursue this field? So I guess that would be helpful for them.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question, and my answer is going to be a little bit different than what some of the budding entrepreneurs and fresh graduates would have heard. I strongly
Yeah.
believe that we need to have two types of skill sets available in the electricity market in India. One is the
Yeah.
fundamental electricity distribution and understanding how this entire technicality of sending electrons from one place to the other are concerned. Okay, so we
Yeah.
cannot really lose out on that. So, how much ever digitization that we can bring to the
Yeah.
table, the fundamental of the electricity consumption need to be understood very well. And this is very similar to we can have all sorts of infrastructure projects coming in India, building roads, highways, large complexes, and so on. So you need civil engineers. Similar to that, I truly feel that you need good engineers capable of managing the electricity grid. That's the first part. The second part is in terms of the skilling is entire digitization and how do we sort of bring in opportunities to use the skill sets related to software development and using different types of hardware requirements and then all of that should sort of give them opportunities to even look at data sciences, right? So
Yeah.
application of data sciences in the electricity market is absolutely a great opportunity before us. So that's the sort of second part of it. And the third part is basically different types of innovators bringing in new business models into the electricity market is also important, right?
Yeah,
So you may have a particular smaller aggregator which is working on a feeder to promote investments in energy efficiency, renewable energy, rooftop solar, thermal energy storage, and battery energy storage. So one can start making investments on the customer side of the meter on behalf of the distribution companies. And
yeah,
then, so that kind of a business modeling expertise is also absolutely essential. To sum
yeah,
up, I think I'm recommending three skill sets that are important for the electricity market. First one is the fundamental engineering skill set. The second one is maximizing the benefits of digitization and disruptive technology applications using AI, ML techniques, and so on. And the third one is coming up with new business solutions, which
yeah,
can be framed within the existing regulatory framework, but the business models that can actually even look beyond, and we
yeah.
can sort of get geared up for the future.
Okay, that's great. And to find it up, if I have missed out on anything and you would like to uh, tell our audience, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think we covered all sort of the relevant things as far as Indian electricity market is concerned. But I certainly would like to emphasize and re-emphasize on the fact that we need to understand how the load is behaving and how that load can take benefit of low-cost generation that's available from the renewable energy sources in the marketplace. So my sort of key takeaway as far as the electricity markets in India is concerned is that we cannot really look at conventional way of understanding how we are generating electricity. I think it's also important for us to start understanding how we are consuming the electricity, and are there any kind of innovations that we can bring to the table, wherein the load centers such as buildings, airports, cold storage facilities, electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and what I call as grid interactive buildings can sort of start taking advantage of the generation, which means we now, as a fraternity, need to start focusing on the built environment and how the load centers are behaving as much as we try to understand the generation side of things. So the Indian electricity market, I really would like to start seeing some kind of a convergence between the generation side and the consumption side. And I think it's important for us to understand both equally.
Yes.
And in today's conditions, I would say we need to understand the load side of things a lot more than the generation side of things.
Absolutely, I agree with you over there that understanding consumption is one of the most essential things in defining how do we move forward. And that needs to come up as much as we have come up with generation side as of now in India. Thanks a lot, Dr. Mahesh. This was absolutely an interesting session for me because I got to learn a lot of new things about markets, which I had kind of forgotten as I had shifted my field to urban development now. But thank you a lot for giving us your knowledge and sharing your experience with us.
Thanks a lot, Puneet. Thank you for inviting me to this interesting podcast. I hope the listeners would benefit from some of the points that I made and would be glad to get connected with any interested individuals and groups and companies wherever we can sort of develop some common solutions. Thanks a lot, Puneet.
Thank you, Dr. Mahesh. I'll surely make sure that if anything comes up to our side, we will send it forward to you.
You have been listening to Understanding the Future podcast. To know more about Climate Center for Cities, check out our website www.niua.org/c-q. The show is conceptualized, produced, and edited by Punit Gandhi, Senior Associate at CQ. You can now subscribe to our podcast on your favorite channel, which can be accessed through the credits. Also, don't forget to follow us on our social media for more updates. Do share your reviews with us and help us spread the podcast to your friends and colleagues. Do write to us if you would be interested in learning about any specific topics. Thank you and stay tuned for our next episode.